So without further ado, I'd like to kick off this event and hand over the virtual microphone to our first speaker, Gáspár Nagy. Well, Gáspár, we're glad you could join us today. Gáspár is the creator and main contributor of SpecFlow and has helped many teams implement BDD and SpecFlow as an independent coach, trainer, test automation expert. And with over 20 years of experience in enterprise software development, I'm sure he can learn us a thing or two on creating readable living documentation. So Gáspár, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone. I will be just switching over to my screen. Unfortunately, you will not see me during the presentation, but for the Q&A, I will come back with my video feed as well. So thank you for the introduction. It's very hard to put any kind of years into your biography because you have to update it every single year. So whenever I hear such numbers, somebody's representing me, then I'm always thinking that did I update it for that year? But I think the 20 years is pretty good. So for today, I have chosen the presentation title, "Living Documentation Must Be Readable." It's a great big topic, and there are a lot of things to share. I was trying to find something which is probably inspiring you for this event. You have heard the intro of myself. I don't want to say too much things, but basically I'm dealing with BDD most of the time. I'm a BDD coach, BDD trainer, and do a lot of other things with BDD, including writing a book series together with Sebros. Really proud that finally we got the second book, The Formulation, coming out a month ago. So if you are interested to read more about these things, and especially about BDD, if you head over to bddbooks.com, then you will find all the links for the book. So this is a living documentation event, but as you have seen, my affiliation is more towards BDD. So whenever I talk about living documentation, somewhat I will be more focusing on the how you are practicing or how you can create a living documentation from the BDD perspective. If you are doing it somewhere else, I think the major of the things would be also applicable, but maybe it wouldn't be that, so that maybe the concrete examples wouldn't fare before moving on to the topics. So when I heard that I'm going to be the first speaker here, then I thought that, okay, it would be great to start with some sort of definition for living documentation. You have heard in the intro some words about what living documentation is, but I wanted to really find something which is clear and condensed. And I did a lot of research to see how people explain living documentation. And the one that I have found for today that I like the best is coming from John Ferguson Smart. He has a great blog post. We will share the slides and you will get the link if you want to read the entire blog post. Basically, his definition was the shortest, and I think that fits to such a nice afternoon. But I wanted to make it even more shorter. And anyway, there were like 5% of the attendees who anyway don't know what they are doing here. Maybe they are mathematicians. So I was also trying to come up with all the mathematic studies I have used so far and try to turn the definition of living documentation into a mathematical formula, and based on John's article. So basically John is saying, and I like this very much, that living documentation is nothing else than as the name suggests, something which is a documentation and living. So I think that's the shortest definition that we can ever find. And what does that mean? It means that this is a documentation. So it somehow describes how the application works. And it's also living, which can mean that that is generated by an automated test suite at every time when the application is built. So it's always up to date. That's how we could basically define living documentation. And I think that's somewhat clear to many people. It's basically it's in the name. The definition is in the name. But regarding my experience, when people start to adapt creating a living documentation or start to really make a living documentation, then there's some sort of selective vision or selective listening is switching off, and from all these things that you see on the slides, there is only one word that remains there, is that it should be somehow automated. So somehow we feel that automation is just the making the things living documentation. Automation is all with us. So definitely it's a big movement of trying to automate everything, which is absolutely fine, and that there is nothing wrong with that. But what I want to highlight is that living documentation is probably not fully equals to automated tests, and that's something that we definitely should keep in mind. As I have mentioned, I'm working as a kind of trainer coach, so I see at different companies many different forms of tests that's supposed to be part of the living documentation. In context of BDD, this typically means that I have to see a lot of Bdd scenarios, and unfortunately, many times I see Bdd scenarios like that. Which is maybe an automated test, probably it's not the best one, and maybe this is using some sort of language elements, readability elements like the give and then keywords that Bdd has introduced, but definitely this is not something that I would call a living documentation. So that's definitely a wrong approach, and maybe this is a little bit overemphasizing the problem, but definitely we see many Bdd scenarios, many tests that's supposed to be part of the living documentation that somehow doesn't work like that, and it's absolutely not readable. So that's what I would like to a little bit more dig into that. And first of all, it looks like that there is something wrong with these tests, or something wrong with our test if we are creating such kind of test. And of course, the answer would be that let's make it readable, but I would like to try to figure it out that why that's that important, and what's really the problem with these kind of tests. It's even if they are using give and then. And one thing that I really liked to do before the lockdown has happened, that sometimes the best thing is to just sit in a team room and listen about their discussions, and or maybe in a coffee break. And I try to capture these moments, and definitely I have heard the following situation a couple of times. So when people have started to work with these tests and started to work with Bdd, for example, then initially we have now created a couple of tests, and these are green and passing, and everyone is super enthusiastic, and the developers are happy that okay, finally now we made something and it works. Product owner is also super happy that how proud I am of my team, and everything is fine. But interestingly, just a couple of months later, the same team, the same scenarios, the same tests starting to fail. And when it's starting to fail, the mood and the discussions are changing a lot. So the developers are just looking at those tests and holding their head that what is this, and who has created this? Of course, they were creating it. And the PO also cannot really say anything to that. It just says that okay, something is wrong, but what is wrong? And also cannot really help the team, and cannot really make any decisions on how we can work with these failures. So that's something that I have seen that somehow related to the problem that we are trying to understand here. I'm a visual person, so for me, sometimes to understand the things, I like to put them into some diagrams or draw them. This is what I'm going to do. I hope it also helps you as well. So basically, if you try to put this situation into a scale of problem domain and solution domain, then we can see that the requirements are definitely on the problem domain side, and on the other hand, the application is definitely on the solution part. Obviously, we can also see that the product owner is more representing the business, the problem space. However, those tests, for example, those tests that you have seen, are definitely in the solution space. So that's basically if you are trying to plot this into this diagram. And what you have seen that whenever the PO wanted to be happy about that or wanted to react on a problem, then what we have seen is that they were trying to control these tests. But obviously, it's very hard to control something which is out of your control. So obviously, the product owner is more familiar with the things in the problem domain and not in the solution domain. So that's definitely not going to work. And that is why these situations, why these team dialogues are actually happening. Let's zoom in a little bit and just to try to have a better understanding of that. So I said that the requirements are in the problem domain side. And just take an example of requirements so that it should be easier to explain. Right now I was just choosing some ATM pin change process, and one piece of requirement, one business rule is that the old pin should be correct, obviously, and at the pin change, this is rather an important thing. So what the team does when they are implementing this requirement, they are implementing some source code. Right now, this is a source code in C#. Probably you don't speak C#. Don't worry, that's the point of the solution space, that there are things in there which we don't understand. So they are implementing it with some solution, and those tests that we have seen are sometimes just simply coded down as coded tests and trying to verify whether we have understood the requirements or not. And actually, we have seen that these were the tests that were problematic because they, just like if someone is not a programmer, definitely will not understand those tests. Obviously, the product owners also cannot relate to that test. And from that perspective, it doesn't matter whether this test is implemented in C# or Java or whatever other programming language, or in Gherkin as Bdd Scenario, if it looks like that scenario. That's what happens, and that's why we have these problems. Let's try to fix this. How we could fix this? So this was the situation. The tests were sitting in a solution space, and at least in PowerPoint, it's super easy to fix this problem. The only thing that you need to do is that you would need to move the tests to this shared ownership zone, so that both the product owner and the business people should be able to relate to that, and also the developers, the solution people should be able to work with that and be able to automate those tests and verify their application. So that's, as I said, in PowerPoint, it's easy to fix it, but unfortunately we have to do this in a real application as well, so or with a real project as well. And so the question is that, okay, how could the entire team own these tests? And at least in Bdd, we have collected a couple of practices, and automation is definitely one of those practices that we generally do when we are doing Bdd. But there are usually things we are missing. In Bdd, there is something which we are calling discovery. This is a moment where we want to better understand the requirements and trying to come up with key examples or illustrative examples for the requirements. And those illustrative examples are describing the requirement, the behavior of the requirement with concrete details. And once we have understood requirements like that, then maybe we can turn it into a properly formulated way in a proper documentation that is keeping the original intent of the examples, but on one hand making it automatable, and on the other hand basically can put it into a form that really serves as a documentation, not like with the Bdd Scenario we have seen before. So these are the two things that we are usually missing: the discovery and the formulation. And basically now in the remaining parts of the talk, I would like to share a few details about these things. Okay, so let's start with the discovery. So the short explanation for discovery would be that we are trying to discuss the requirements using examples. And actually, this is not a new concept at all. This is nothing that living documentation has introduced. This is nothing that Bdd has introduced. Even in the IT space, there are multiple names, multiple things where how this process is basically used for. For example, example-based specification, specification by example, example-guided development. And actually, that was one of the early practices that the pioneers of Agile software development were already using, or maybe even before. But it's even more like that. You will see that learning through examples is something which is a core learning practice of how all humans are learning. So typically, we humans are not able to understand abstract principles and rules, but we need a couple of examples to be able to get into our real knowledge. So that's the discovery. That's the concept of discovery that we would like to practice. And why this is important, and why is it important to not miss this particular moment? Probably you have heard about that, or you have seen such studies. this particular study is pretty old, so probably the numbers doesn't have to be taken literally. But I think based on the studies and also our feelings, we can see that many issues, many production issues, bugs, any kind of things that is basically limiting or reducing our efficiency is somehow rooted from requirements, not well understood requirements, forgotten requirements, assumptions that were not true, and many other things. So this is that's why having a better understanding of the requirements it might help. At least we can reduce those half of the bugs that we are currently building into our application. So let's see this in our example. So the thing starts with the same requirement, all things should be correct. And when the team discusses this requirement, they are coming up with concrete examples. And of course, sometimes a concrete example is very simple, like this one. So that let's imagine that my pin was 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm entering my old pin as 1, 1, 1, 1, which is definitely wrong, and I try to change the pin, then my pin change should be rejected. That's a very simple example, but you can probably come up with a couple of other examples, other things that are basically having us a better understanding of how that particular rule has to be interpreted. Once we have this understanding, once we know all these details, then we will have a much better starting point for implementing our solution. So having the better understanding is helping us to make a better solution. And as you see this concrete example almost looks like a test, except that it's now written on a sticky note, which is not yet valid for test execution. So what we have to do, but we can make a test out of that, and of course we could use the same technical methods that we were using so far. So we could make a unit test or some technical test for that. But now that test is already having some background. That test is also having some connection to the requirements because it was derived from one of the examples that we have collected. Okay, so at least the test have some counterpart on the other side. But unfortunately, this is not enough, because unfortunately codified tests are maybe great when you are making them, but they are not really good to maintain. So just imagine that you come back to this test half a year later, then you will get a lot of questions that, okay, what was the example? We don't remember that anymore. What is these numbers here? What is the card service? What, I don't know, a lot of questions probably popping up. And unfortunately, if you just, without thinking, literally translate this technical test to a given then-based scenario, that's maybe answering some of the questions, but definitely not all of them. So now it's a given then it's less ugly than the one that I have shown you in the beginning, but still it's not perfect, because we still don't know what these long numbers are doing there, and maybe some other things are unnecessary details here. And this is where we would need to have a little bit of more consideration, and we would need to find a couple of or follow a couple of principles to write these scenarios in a better form. That's what we are sometimes calling a formulation process. So how to document these examples, that they should be part of the shared knowledge and they should be better maintainable. So that's the other missing bit that we usually that we don't necessarily follow. Again, let's get back to the example. So the starting point is the same. So we have the rule. We have discussed it with examples that are illustrating the rule. But now, before actually starting to implement the solution and trying to codify this example, the first thing that we want to do is trying to turn this example into something which is more stable, which will better work as a documentation. And of course, what it supports test automation. And this is basically how we can define a Bdd scenario. So Bdd scenario is nothing else than a formulated example, which is properly documenting that example that we have seen so far. And now, since we haven't even yet considered how we are going to automate that, we were just really looking at the example. Now you can see that many of the unnecessary details are just gone away. And actually, in this form, the scenario is much more straightforward and much more expressing what we wanted to verify there. Okay, so once we have discussed this scenario. Of course, the scenario doesn't contain all the details that we need to be able to make it executable, but we can do that. We can those details can be implemented as in BDD. We are calling these things step definitions, but somehow you can provide the automation code that makes this description somehow automatable. And if you made it automatable, basically that can even help you to come up with a solution, because continuously you can verify your solution bit that you are creating. And once you are finished with the solution, then finally the test is turning into green, highlighting you that first of all you did the right thing, and then that you have already finished with the right thing. And of course it can also help you to avoid doing unnecessary things. So So that's how the formulation can help you to basically move these things into the shared zone. And this is how the formulated scenarios are not only useful as documentation, but they can even help you while creating these things. Formulation is a big topic, and there are a lot of very good practices that the BDD practitioners have collected over the years. And I mentioned in the beginning that we just finished our formulation book, and when we were preparing the book, basically we were trying to find all these practices from different groups and different people, and once we had a nice list, we were trying to play a little bit with the words of those practices, so that we can make it a little bit easier to remember. And this is how we got to the concept of brief principles. And actually, these principles are not something that we were coming up with. Actually, we were just shaping it to the form that it's easier to remember. So it's called brief principles because all of the first 5 principles, so if you just read out the initials of the first 5 principles, then basically it makes the word brief, similarly like the invest for user stories. And all of these things in this list are something that I think a good formulated documentation, a good readable living documentation should somehow follow. I will not go into the details, but just briefly go through that. So that the first one, B, stands for business language. This means that we would like to express these things using the business language and not technical things. R stands for real data. We want to make it concrete. We want to see some concrete details. Otherwise, it's very hard to judge whether these are really good or not. I stands for intention revealing. That is focusing on that you really want to say what you want it to do and not what are the mechanical steps to be able to achieve that. Essential is that we only want to see all those details that are really important for our purpose. You have seen some inessential details in our first try. Focused stands for that we would like to focus this scenario for a particular business rule. Otherwise, it will be very hard to compose a nice structured living documentation out of that. And the good thing is that brief doesn't only useful for remembering these elements of the living documentation, these scenarios short and easy to understand, then it will be much easier to get feedback about that. So that's something that makes sense. If you just Google for brief principles, you will find a lot of some articles which are discussing that in detail. As a last bit of the formulation topic, I wanted to just bring in this question that who should formulate. I think this is anyway important. Who should create the living documentation if you see it more general? And for that, I would like to address 3 questions that we very commonly get. The first question is that, okay, so if we are a Scrum team or whatever, an Agile team, shouldn't the entire team formulate these bits together? And it looks like that's maybe this is great if you are just doing the first few scenarios, but altogether this is not so good because of efficiency reasons. So typically formulating properly, expressing a bit of living documentation needs a lot of practical decisions like grammars, word ordering, reusing existing steps, whatever. That's something that is very hard to do with the entire team. Half of the team would get falling out of the discussion and we would just waste their time. Of course, their feedback is important, but maybe it's better if you are just approaching them with some asynchronous review process, so that everyone will have a chance to make comments on the scenarios that we have created. So you can do that, but it's not practical. It's not efficient so much. Okay, so if not the entire team, then maybe it should be only a single person should do that. Typically, they put this task to the testers or the product owners, but that's also not really good because these scenarios are part of the shared ownership, and they have to be have connected to the requirements, but they also have to be connected on to the solution space. We have to be able to automate that. So somehow, to be able to make a good scenario, you have to consider the technical and the business perspective as well. And typically, this is very hard if only one person is doing that. So it looks like that the best is doing it with a pair of people, and many teams are doing it in a way that the tester and the developer is pairing with each other. But I think any kind of pair is probably a good solution. And when people hear that, so that a developer and a tester is working on that, then the immediate question I get is that okay, but shouldn't they really? The developer should rather do the development, and the tester should do the testing. Why they are doing that, and why not the product owner is writing these things if they are anyway owning the product? But that's not like that. The product owner is owning the product, that's true, but it's also their responsibility to transfer the knowledge to the team. And to be able to verify that they were able to transfer this knowledge, somehow we need to have some sort of feedback. And doing it together with the team is a very nice feedback process because then they can verify whether they really understood that properly. If I want to say it in a very simple way, we can say that maybe the requirements are owned by the PO, but the specification, which is not only the requirements but all of the agreements that how we are going to do this, is definitely owned by the entire team. So it's definitely not something that you can put on the PO and they can just do it alone, or at least it will not be that efficient. Okay, so we have seen the concept of how we can move these Bdd scenarios, living documentation entities, into the shared ownership, and we have seen these two missing pieces, like the discovery and the formulation. At least maybe a little bit of highlight on that. So basically, that's a time to wrap up this talk and to leave you with some final message. So what we wanted to show here is that the living documentation must be readable, otherwise it will not be able to get into the shared ownership. And all of what we were talking about was somewhat related to functional quality. All of these requirements, business requirements, were typically part of the functional quality. And whenever you are thinking about the functional quality, absolutely, this is true that if you are having automated tests, that they are a great tool to ensure the functional quality. That's true. But it's very important to highlight that functional quality is not only whether it works as expected, but it's also very important, and this is what we wanted to highlight here, is that we also have to make sure that those expectations are good, properly understood, clean, and doesn't have the misunderstandings, and well documented. So you see that the discovery and the formulation is basically matching to these things that we have seen. So never forget that you can only verify functional quality if you know what to verify, if you know your expectation, if you know if they are good, and if you know that they are properly documented. Otherwise, you will not be able to judge whether a particular test is valid to be failing or it's a bad thing that it fails. So we have moved finally the scenarios into the shared ownership, and basically that's great because now they can, on one hand, validate the requirements, and on the other hand, verify whether the application fulfills these requirements. So they are working like a bridge between the requirement space and the solution space. The first book of Gojkovic in terms of specification, by example, was called Bridging the Communication Gap, and this is what we are trying to achieve with these scenarios right now. The BDD activities are helping you with the discovery, formulation, and automation. And hopefully, if you do that, then finally, if you are listening to the team room that we were just looking at in the beginning, then a couple of episodes later or a couple of months later, we will see dialogues like that. Product owner comes. Hey, it looks like that we have found a strange production issue. Well, believe or not, you will even find production issues even if you are doing BDD. So unfortunately, we cannot fully reduce that. So product owner comes with a production issue. Hey guys, can we just look into that? Sure, let's have a look at the related Bdd scenarios. That's the team's answer. So they are using the living documentation. And when they look into the living documentation together, because it's understandable for both parties, then they immediately spot out that, oh, okay, there is an important detail that we haven't, that we have forgotten about. Okay, let's fix it. Now we know how to move on, and now we know how to work on that. So finally, living documentation work. The best living documentation is the one that is used, and for that, readability is a very important concern. So I hope that you will also get a working living documentation, and with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And as far as I know now, we have a very short time for some questions.
We indeed got a few questions. You mentioned the discovery phase, or discussing requirements using examples, so that it isn't new at all. Do you have any explanation why it took us so long to make it in a more a formal way of working, we now call behavior driven development or living documentation?
This is a very, very good question. I don't really know why it took so long time, but somehow what I definitely see is that in the IT industry, we are living in that kind of false illusion, or illusion that requirements can be properly written down. And nobody has ever seen a proper written down documentation, but we are always saying that, okay, it's not good because the one who did it wasn't doing the right job, or it wasn't trained enough, or the contexts were not good, and whatever. So we always find some sort of thing why it's not working. But we still somehow live in this illusion that this is possible. But I think it's not possible, and you can find many examples from the other parts of the world that you cannot properly. Just think about law, a book of law. Even though that there is a book of law which is very precisely trying to say how we should behave in a society, still there is a lot of interpretation of that. That's why we have the judges who need to decide how to interpret that particular things for a concrete example. Or just I'm pretty sure that if you have ever tried to learn, I don't know, a sport game like a soccer, then it wasn't like that you were just reading through the soccer's manual and then you were just putting together with a couple of other people who never played soccer, just read the rules and you start playing. That's not how it works. You just join the team who already were playing for some time, and you have seen how they were working and learned through from their examples. So I think somehow, I don't know why it took so long time, but definitely this is something that we have to understand, that this is not possible. So it will never work with a proper written requirement, because the one who is telling the requirements have some assumptions, and we also have some other assumptions, and these two things are impossible to otherwise match, other than discussing it over, hopefully supported by examples.
Thank you. A good point. One of the listeners also talked about unnecessary details needing to be deleted, which seems to be a fair point. But I've myself often seen that there is a lot of confusion between what is an unnecessary detail and which details are part of making your examples concrete and precise enough. Do you have any thoughts on how to decide which details are really needed for your scenarios and which ones are indeed not necessary? Yeah.
This is something that you need a little bit of practice to really feel that, and that's absolutely fine to have some discussions, and probably it's not really a black and white thing, but a good practice that you can do is that you are just thinking about, if you are, for example, considering a Bdd scenario, think about the things backwards. So look at your then steps, and the then steps are telling you what you have expected. Okay, and then just think about that backwards, so that, okay, if this is my expectation, okay, what did I have to do to be able to get this expectation? Okay, this is going to be your then step. And okay, so I know what I expected, and I know what was triggering that expectation. What else is needed to be able to have that? And then just go backwards and just only focus on those things that are really needed for that outcome. So basically what you are doing here is that you are focusing on the outcome and trying to search for those details that are somewhat relevant for those outcomes. So for example, if you want to check whether your old PIN is correct or not, obviously it's not relevant whether you have used your credit card or your debit card, right? Because I mean, the PIN code is maybe the same, or it doesn't matter what your name was, or how much money do you have in your account. All of these things are irrelevant details or inessential details. And that's a practice. After a while, you will immediately see. So you just need to get this practice, basically.
Yeah, agree. Well, I think looking at the time, we have still one question, room for one question. One of the listeners noticed you gave a specific example, a scenario, and someone noticed, hey, it's only verifying that the system is not doing what it's not supposed to do, which is an important part of the test, but you haven't verified the positive proof to requirement yet. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm very happy about this question. This question proves my point. If you see a concrete example, that is triggering a discussion. Okay, and that's what we want to see. So one example is, that's why examples are working. If you see one example, then immediately these questions are coming up. Okay, but yes, but what about the other one? What about the other one? And exactly this is the discussion that we would like to have, because otherwise these questions would pop up while we are already implementing the application. Okay, so that's basically proving my point. Obviously, I mean, the concrete answer is that obviously for one rule, you don't necessarily have only one example and only one scenario. So I was just randomly picking one, but the point is good. Probably that's not a complete picture. And it looks like that we need more examples to have a solid understanding for this particular problem.
Thanks for elaborating on that.